Critical literacy. It's so much more than reading. Critical literacy involves reading critically, thinking about the identity and intent of the writer and the social and historical context in which the text was written. Critical literacy thus challenges the status quo in an effort to discover alternative paths for self and social development. How do we teach critical literacy? There are many options through media, fairy tales, and creating social awareness in classrooms, but really there is no best way to teach critical literacy. The following research is from the article Out of the Box, Critical Literacy in a First Grade Classroom by Christine H. Leland and Jerome C. Harasti with Kimberly R. Huber. Under funding from Indiana University, Huber received the Collaborations for Peace grant. This supported her efforts in investigating critical literacy, including a library of books for her classroom that focused on social issues and marginalized characters. Huber used the library of books in her classroom in order to increase awareness. She read and discussed social issues with her students. Stories about social issues or marginalized individuals provided from the grant were the starting point. After story times, discussion and artistic responses were included in the students' curriculum. The students are given the opportunity to discuss and artistically respond to the stories. Responses prove to be critical and well thought out. Two children will often have similar responses to the story, and they're able to understand it critically. Here, the students respond to the book Feathers and Fools. You'll notice the first child responded, "The swans were mean on the outside. They were going to fight. The swans were scared on the inside. They didn't know what to do." The second child responded with, "They think they are tough on the outside, but they aren't. They're scared." Over time, students began to see the world differently from reading critical text. Students began to get along better with others. Huber noticed that her students were more likely to get along with one another than previous years of students. Students also began to bend over backwards to help each other. The students gained an awareness of social issues. Kim Huber began to notice her students asking more questions. They were aware of others around them that may be in need. Students began to have more empathy for others and a desire to help. The students' quality of writing and art also improved. Huber noticed that her students began to have a more thoughtful and lengthy response. Children's artwork also became more thoughtful and detailed. First graders and fairy tales. One teacher's action research of critical literacy. Burke, 2008, described this article as follows. In the following pages, I detail the struggles, victories, and defeats included as my students and I wrestled with the implications of adopting critical literacy. In an effort to honor my students' preferred genre, I had introduced this previously absent practice via unorthodox critical texts, fairy tales. Ryan T. Burke, 2008, used a variety of fairy tales to teach his first graders critical literacy. In his first lesson with Three Billy Goats Gruff, he noticed that his students were listening very intently. To build on their interest, he decided to try and situate questions so that they would see themselves as different characters in the story. Thus began critical readers. Further review of first graders and fairy tales indicates that Burke had great success in teaching literacy to his students. It is important to consider that fairy tales are a good idea when teaching critical literacy. It does provide the students with something that they're familiar with. In addition, I agree with Burke. Critical literacy can be taught in conjunction with basic literacy skills. In fact, it may be preferred. Librarians can use critical literacy in their programming and story times. They can use formats similar to Burke or Huber. Currently, there probably are not a lot of librarians or teachers tackling social issues in their classrooms as Kim Huber did. For educators, it can be intimidating to think about presenting controversial social issues to children when parents may not be supportive. It's ideal to start with fairy tales or stories that you would typically use in a story time. What does this research mean for real-life experiences? Critically literate individuals have the ability to place social and historical context on things that they are reading or listening to. This can be played out in advertisements, movies, and more. The first example I have is advertisements. People have the ability to determine the difference between realistic and unrealistic advertisements. Critical literacy skills allow children and adults to understand when advertisements may be exaggerating. Here's an example from a weight loss program. Lose 100 pounds in 2 weeks for just $700 a week. Sounds nice. What do you think about that advertisement? Is losing 100 pounds in 2 weeks reasonable? What about the cost? What about the author? Who is the author, and is this credible information? Critical literacy would tell us that this is probably not a good program for anyone to be on. The next example are movies and books. Sometimes movies and books give children skewed expectations of reality. Critical literacy skills allow children as they grow older to understand the difference. Here the blog She Exists posted this picture. Anyone else understand the unrealistic expectations about their hair? Well, what do you think? Did Disney portray any unreal expectations for you? Any other movies or books stand out as having unachievable expectations? And why did the author create a story that would be like that? You can read the blog posting on She Exists for more Disney unrealistic expectations, but historically Disney movies and books have given unachievable expectations to children. The next example is the news. News and news reporters do not always tell the whole story. Sometimes reports are distributed before the information is fully developed, and sometimes there may be another side of the story to tell. The following article about the Sandy Hook shooting. Notice how it says the unnamed CBS sources. And then according to the sources. This sounds like a reasonable article, right? Continue reading the article 2 paragraphs later. Police dismissed the report. A spokesperson for Connecticut State Police dismissed the CBS report. A final report is expected this summer. No information will be released until the investigation is finished. Essentially, CNN is reporting that CBS was inaccurate. If you had only read the CBS report, you would be severely misinformed. What do you think? Have you watched the news lately? News stories can twist the words and report from sources. Again, ask yourself, who is the source of this information? Critical literacy is an important literacy that can start developing at a young age. While teaching basic literacy skills and reading to children, educators should begin to add questions and considerations that are critical. Over time, children will begin to think critically, independently, and thus develop critical literacy. As children get older and start to have real-life experiences that need critical thinking, they will protect themselves from being misled. Reading between the lines, thinking outside of the box, reading through a lens, asking questions. For more information, please see any of these articles. The following references can also be used for more information, but were cited within the project.